happy Halloween, science fans! This is Field Lab Earth, the podcast that's all about past and present advances in the fields of agronomic, crop, soil, and environmental sciences. And today, we'll be talking to Dr. Wendell Hutchens about this year's scary Halloween pest, spring dead spot. Spring dead spot is a disease that lies in wait before going after your turf grasses, transforming your favorite golf course into the set of your favorite PG-13 slasher. This episode, Wendell joins me to discuss the mega gains made in the last 15 years of spring dead spot research in hopes that someday we can turn this slow-moving monster into just the stuff of legend. I'm your host, Abby Morrison. Let's talk about science. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today we have Wendell Hutchens with us. Wendell Hutchens, PhD, is an assistant professor of turfgrass science and pathology in the horticulture department at the University of Arkansas. He received his bachelor's and master's degree in turfgrass science and pathology from North Carolina State University. He received his doctoral degree in turfgrass pathology from Virginia Tech. His main areas of expertise are turfgrass pathology, precision management of turfgrass pests using emerging technologies, and winter kill mitigation strategies in warm season turfgrasses. His research program is centered around maintaining healthy turfgrass and combating turfgrass stressors with traditional, cultural, and chemical practices, as well as with cutting-edge technology. Dr. Hutchens has published many research papers and given well over 100 presentations on these topics around the United States and world. Hello, Wendell. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Abby. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so excited to have you on today. So it is spooky season, which means we get to do a Halloween episode on a scary pest. So today we are talking about spring dead spot, which also has a nicely spooky name. So if you could get us started, just tell us all about spring dead spot. What's going on with that?
Yeah, it's certainly a spooky disease, okay? It is a major issue on turf grasses throughout the United States, especially Bermuda grass, really warm season grasses that grow in kind of these tropical or subtropical climates, but also into the transition zone, which is kind of where if you took a belt right across the middle of America, that we would kind of consider that as the transition zone. So it's where we have kind of all four seasons. We have kind of cold winters, warm summers, and mild falls and springs. And so in that particular part of the United States, this is the primary disease on warm season grasses. It happens every spring, typically, which is why it's called spring dead spot. I always joke that plant pathologists are not very creative in our naming of diseases. We saw a dead spot in the spring, so we called it spring dead spot. It's fitting. Easy to remember, though. So this particular disease, the pathogen infects the plant in the fall, and it weakens the plant going into wintertime. And then when that plant is exposed to some kind of cold temperature or sub-freezing temperature during the wintertime, it's going to be more susceptible to dying because the pathogen has weakened it so much. And so when the plant starts to green back up in the springtime, there are patches or spots that are dead from the pathogen infection combined with the cold weather. So it's really challenging to manage because if you see the disease, it's pretty much too late to do anything to manage it at that point. You have to be completely preventative for this particular disease.
Oh, yeah, that is nicely spooky, just lurking in the background until it's too late.
That's right.
Fantastic. So the paper that we're talking about today is actually kind of it is explicitly a review paper covering some big advances that we have made in these preventative measures over the past 15 years. Just our knowledge has expanded since the last time we had a really big, nice, chunky review on this particular pathogen.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, would you like to talk a little bit about kind of what brought this paper about?
Yeah, so this was, kind of a fun project for me and the co-authors on this paper. So I did my dissertation on spring dead spots at Virginia Tech, finished that up back in the spring of 2022, and then soon started my role as a professor or assistant professor here at the University of Arkansas. And so during that time, the co-authors and I have been talking about, all the research that's developed on this disease in the last, 15 years or so. And it's really kind of been a major surge in research. And when I was doing my literature review for my dissertation, I realized that this may be a good time to look at another review paper. Also, I'm an assistant professor, so I'm trying to get tenure. Okay. And so one of the qualifications or requirements for getting tenure is you need publications. And so review papers are usually a good approach to kind of get the ball rolling until your research program can get fully underway. So that was also an inspiration for it, to be completely honest. But so we looked at all the literature. There had been a really nice review paper written back in 2009 by Dr. Lane Treadway and his co-authors, Nathan Walker and Maria Tommaso Peterson. They're all great plant pathologists, really world-class. And so they did a great job of summing up all the research, for really 50 or 60 years. But during the last 15 years, we've had almost as much research just in that time frame. And so it was really appropriate to kind of summarize that research and give us a little bit of an updated paper. And it wouldn't be surprised if in another 10 or 15 years we have a third review paper on the topic, just because it's kind of becoming an emerging issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Love the transparency. Love the honesty on that one. But yeah, it does seem like there have been many advances in the last 15 years. So there was kind of 3 larger sections within your review paper. So we'll jump into the first one, which is what we've learned about the biology. Mm-hmm. And so I know one of the first things was kind of just learning more about how it works. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, this is kind of a unique pathosystem, so to speak. The way the pathogen and the plant interact in this particular disease system is not normal, not what we typically think of with most turfgrass diseases or most agricultural diseases in general. As I mentioned earlier, when you see symptoms, it's really way too late to do anything about it. And so that kind of presents a unique challenge to turfgrass managers for this particular disease. But one of the interesting things about spring dead spots is we call it that disease, but it's also caused by many pathogens. Okay, so there's 3 different species that really primarily cause this disease. Now they're all closely related, but they're not the same species. And so that in itself kind of makes it a little quirky. So we have Ophiostaphyla corae, that's the first species. It's kind of a soil-borne pathogen. It resides primarily kind of in the roots and the stolons and rhizomes of turfgrass plants. So they like to stay underground, basically. They don't come up on the leaves very often. And so Ophiostaphyla corae is a pretty aggressive pathogen. It can kill the roots and the stolons of a turfgrass plant and weaken them going into wintertime, like I mentioned earlier. The second pathogen is Ophiostaphyla herpatrica. That one's very common, particularly in my neck of the woods here in Arkansas. We see that particular species causing spring dead spot pretty regularly. And then the third is Ophiostaphyla normari. And Ophiostaphyla normari is not a huge issue here in the United States. We have found it is certainly here, but it's not as prominent as the other 2. Normari is mainly an issue kind of when you get down into Australia, New Zealand area. So that's a big issue for them down there. But here in the United States, we have Ophiostaphyla corae and Ophiostaphyla herpatrica. Now, you would think that's, okay, cool. What does that mean? Well, these 2 pathogens really kind of differentially are distributed throughout the U.S. So herpatrica is one we typically think of as kind of a Midwest pathogen. Okay, so Oklahoma, Arkansas, kind of when you get up into even southern Kansas and those areas, you're going to find a lot of herpatrica. Whereas corae is primarily an issue in the southeastern U.S. So kind of, when you get into the Carolinas, Tennessee, Georgia, that's where you're going to find corae most predominantly. So we kind of know where these are distributed. It's not perfect, right? You can't just say for sure every spring dead spot patch in Georgia is going to have corae. It could have some herpatrica, but in general, the pathogens kind of distribute out that way. And so what does it matter which pathogen causes the disease, right? That's kind of the big question. If they both cause the disease, it looks the same. It seems like it behaves the same. Well, the way we manage these is pretty disparate between the two pathogens. If spring dead spot is caused by Herpetotrica, it responds very differently to certain cultural practices, like certain fertilizer applications. And it also responds differently to chemical practices like fungicide applications. And so if you're a turfgrass manager, it really behooves you to know which species is the primary species at your facility, right? So you can manage it appropriately. So that's kind of a big challenge with this particular disease, and kind of the biology behind it is the different pathogens that actually cause the disease.
Sure. And then we have kind of some complications that can make this just even more of a problem, maybe. Well, we've learned a little bit about how it kind of survives and overwinters, which is obviously part of the problem, is that it survives long enough to affect it in the spring. Yep. And then there's also some non-symptomatic, maybe infected plants out there. So if you could talk a little bit more about that, as well as their potential for symbiosis.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I'm using pathogen in quotations, right? Because it can behave in multiple ways. A pathogen's really just an organism that causes disease, right? And so some will say a fungi, or a fungal organism. In this case, Ophiosphorella is a fungus. And so certain fungi can behave as symbionts in certain host plants, and they can behave as pathogens in other host plants. It really just depends, which kind of makes it interesting in itself. For turf grasses in general, we can isolate both of these pathogens, Corea and Herpetotrica, in many species of turf grass. Now, do they cause disease across all those species? Not necessarily. Okay, so they can be you can isolate the pathogen within a certain turfgrass species, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's causing disease. Now, in warm season grasses like Bermuda grass and zoysia grass, these fungal organisms, Ophiosphorella, Corea, and Herpetotrica, are true pathogens. Okay, so they do infect the plant, and it leads to symptoms or disease. So we can consider these true pathogens. Whereas in other turfgrass species, particularly cool season grasses, we'll say like tall fescue, for example. It's a very common lawn grass. These pathogens, you might be able to isolate them from that particular plant, but it's not actually going to lead to disease, or at least we haven't found that yet. So that kind of is an interesting thing in itself. Beyond turf grasses, these pathogens actually infect and cause disease in certain agricultural crops like wheat and oats and barley. But in other cases, they can kind of behave, once again, as symbionts. So it's kind of a weird spectrum for these two fungal species, Herpetotrica and Corea, where, I consider them kind of weak pathogens is kind of the category I keep them in generally, is they can't really do it by themselves. They can't kill the plant by themselves. They need some kind of assistance from a stressful environment. So in this case, it's typically cold weather in the wintertime, right? So if you'll find these pathogens infecting the plant all the way into the summertime, but you don't see dead grass in the summertime, it's because it's able to outcompete the pathogen essentially. And so then you get on the other end of the spectrum where they actually potentially assist the plant and help it grow a little bit better and actually start to kind of have that symbiotic relationship. So it's a really unique kind of, I call it pathosystem or relationship, so to speak, with these two fungal organisms and their different host plants. And so that kind of keeps us on our toes as plant pathologists to understand them better and kind of treat them appropriately and categorize them appropriately.
Sure. And then for when they're overwintering, how do they do that? It sounds like some progress has been made in that understanding.
Yeah. So they're overwintering, and really they're over summering too. They can kind of go into this state of, non-infection for a while, or at least where they're kind of putting down survival structures and hanging out for a while. The easiest way to describe it is they go into the stem tissue called the stolon of a turfgrass plant. Okay, so stolons are essentially above ground stems for warm season grasses primarily. And so the pathogen will actually basically go into the stolon tissue, and for lack of a better term, it just kind of hangs out there. Okay, it's kind of a protective environment. It protects it from any kind of UV rays from the sun. keeps it out of major environmental swings in temperature and moisture and things like that. So it's a really good spot for them to sit tight until the environment becomes conducive for them to start infecting and causing damage again. Okay, so they really just stay in the stolons. They don't produce any of these weird structures that kind of like a chlamydospore or something that keeps them really safe by themselves. They basically use the host plant, the stolon tissue, to provide protection for them throughout the summer, the heat of the summer, and really cold points in the wintertime.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you're tired from infecting. You just got to take a break.
That's
just
right.
hang out for a little bit.
Their vacation home. They need to sit back and relax for a little bit. That's right.
Yep. Crashing in your place.
That's right.
So then there's also been, as kind of the final piece of this biology, some progress in sequencing. So kind of bringing in more of the genetic side. So tell me about that.
Yeah, to me, this has been, I would say, the most exciting development in the last 15 years is the fact that the genome for this particular, actually all three species, Herpatrica, Corée, and Narmare, have been sequenced by researchers at Oklahoma State. I got to say, the research program at Oklahoma State, they're doing some really phenomenal things there. Dr. Nathan Walker has been leading the effort for many years. He's a good friend of mine and definitely an expert in spring dead spot and the pathogens that cause the disease. And his team, along with some other collaborators, have been able to actually sequence the genome for these three species, which is really helpful to us as researchers because we have a resource now to look into. We can develop primers for PCR work as well more effectively now that we have the genome sequences, which is really exciting. We can track resistant populations. So, we don't typically think of this pathogen having a lot of fungicide resistance issues. It's not been documented, but now we can actually track that a lot easier in case if it does happen, which is really exciting. It gives us a lot more confidence, so to speak, to diagnose and identify which species is causing spring dead spot. And so turfgrass managers always ask me the question, well, how do I know which species I have at my facility? All I see is dead grass. It's like, well, can you give me something? And so now they're going to have the ability to send a sample off to me or some other plant pathologist throughout the country. And we can quickly identify these because these genomes have been sequenced and also because we have better primers for molecular work or PCR work. And so that is kind of the next frontier, I think, is characterizing the species throughout the United States a little bit with more granularity beyond just the sampling that we've done as researchers.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's a big step.
It is.
That's wonderful. So then that's actually a great segue. Where the next category was kind of the distribution and epidemiology. Yeah. So first of all, I would just love a clear definition of epidemiology here. But then, just where, when, why. There's a lot going on. Let's dive in.
Yeah, this is kind of my primary area of expertise on this particular disease. Kind of a quick definition of epidemiology. I would just say it's the spatial and temporal dynamics of a disease. Okay, so how does the disease change over time and space, essentially? Okay, so that's what we want to focus on is, where does the disease occur? Why does it occur there? And how does that change from year to year, month to month, or, whatever it may be? How can we actually track the movement of a disease over space and time? So that's kind of generally what plant disease epidemiology is. For spring dead spots, this is kind of a unique one. And I would say it's actually a pretty easy one when it comes to an epidemiology perspective. Soil-borne pathogens like spring dead spots, they don't produce a lot of aerial spores. Okay, so that means they don't move very quickly. Okay, so if something produces aerial spores, it can be blown by the wind. It can be picked up by animals and tracked, right? If it's on the foliage, it's easy to kind of be dispersed. And the range of dispersion can be really wide with some of these foliar diseases that produce a lot of spores. For spring dead spot, it's a soil-borne disease that does not produce a lot of spores. So it's very difficult to actually move it from point A to point B. Okay, so that makes our lives as epidemiologists a lot easier because we're not tracking something across state lines or even across thousands of miles. It's going to be very localized. Okay, so for our kind of epidemiology approach for spring dead spot, it's going to be very localized. So you're thinking about specific to maybe a property. Okay, so if it's a golf course or a sod farm or a sports field or whatever it may be, we see this disease consistently appear in certain pockets or clusters, okay, throughout a property. You don't see it widespread. I've never seen the disease completely widespread across an entire stand of turf grass, whether it be a golf course fairway, a sod field, or whatever it may be. It usually appears in little clusters. And so our question when we started doing research on this disease was, why does it appear in that certain area and not in the area 15 yards away from it? Okay, what is special about the areas where the disease seems to manifest? And so we started doing some work sampling specifically in those areas and comparing to areas with less disease or no disease. And so what we found is there are certain factors in the environment, particularly in the soil, that drive the epidemic. Okay, so that's basically they help there. It's really conducive for where that disease wants to be or that pathogen wants to infect. And the main thing we found is it's the thatch or the organic material in the turf grass. Okay, so thatch is kind of this interface between the foliage and the roots, and it's where organic matter starts to break down. And it's actually a perfect environment for pathogens. Okay, it protects them from the UV rays from the sun. There's plenty of moisture in that little microclimates. There's a lot of plant material for them to feed on. And so it's really an ideal environment to harbor pathogens. And so what we found is if the turf grass has more thatch, it has more spring dead spot. Okay. And that has major implications for us when it comes to disease management, because if you're a turf grass manager, not all you really need to do, but one thing you need to do is manage your thatch. If you can manage your thatch, you're going to indirectly manage your disease, right? Another thing that we found is there are a couple of nutrients in the soil that seem to be strongly correlated with where the disease occurs. The primary one that we found was manganese, which I thought was kind of an interesting one. And what we found is areas that actually have more manganese, okay, so that are, if the soil is sufficient or a little bit above sufficient in manganese, you're going to have a less spring dead spot there. Okay, whereas if you have a manganese deficient soil, you're going to have more spring dead spot there. Okay, so there's something about that interaction between manganese and the plant, or manganese and the pathogen, or both, that is actually yielding itself to more or less the disease depending on how much is there. Okay, so it's really easy as a turf grass manager just to take a soil test, make sure your manganese levels are sufficient. If they're not, there's a good chance that you're going to be more prone to getting spring dead spots. So those were kind of some of the key things that we've started to unpack about this disease. One other thing that I thought was kind of interesting that we've learned over time is we would map out this disease for years, right? Just kind of go back to the same area year after year, fly a drone, take images, stitch a map together, and then look at these maps and track them over many years. And you can pretty much predict exactly where the disease is going to occur each year. Because like I said earlier, it doesn't spread very easily through wind and water and things like that. It really only spreads through kind of hyphal growth or slow movement in the soil. And occasionally turf grass managers can have practices like aeration that actually pull up plant material, and that can help move the disease around a little bit as well, but to a minor extent. But what we found is the disease reappears in the same areas year over year, okay, with only mild changes. And so as a turf grass manager, once again, that makes our lives a little bit easier because we know exactly where that disease is going to occur year over year. And so we can kind of tailor our management practices prescriptively in those areas where the disease is from year to year. So we can manage it site specifically, essentially, which is pretty exciting.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the show. Interested in learning more? Wendell's paper, 15 Years of Findings, Advancements in Spring Dead Spot Research from 2009 to 2024, published in Crop Science, is always freely available. If you are a certified crop advisor or certified professional soil scientist, you can take a quiz for continuing education units for this episode, which can be found in our show notes or on certifiedcropadvisor.org. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, that's fantastic. obviously taking some big strides in what we can do preventatively, which kind of leads into this next section, which is also great because my immediate question is like, if we know where it is and it doesn't move very fast, like why can't we just get rid of it? Like why not just be like no more? Which is great because the third section is in fact the management do's and don'ts, and so maybe you can talk about a little of why we can't just wipe the slate there, but also in place of not wiping the slate clean, what we can do.
That's an interesting question, Abby. It's, why can't we just basically eradicate it? And that's, I wish we could fully. It's remarkably challenging to completely eradicate a pathogen population. Now, you can get it on the ropes, so to speak, where you knock down pathogen populations 98, 99%. But that 1% or that 2% always comes back over time. And so you might have it under control for 3 or 4 years in a row. And if you let your guard down, the disease always seems to crop back over time. And we've actually seen that in a lot of different case studies. So that's the challenge. Now, yes, you can get multiple years of control, and that's absolutely, there's a lot of hope for that in the future. And it's interesting, though, what we've primarily been, kind of talking to turfgrass managers about with this disease, and since it appears so localized, is we can kind of tailor our management practices, and we can save a lot of money and resources in managing the disease. So take a golf course superintendent, okay? This disease is a major issue on, we'll say, golf course fairways. All right, so golf course fairways are usually anywhere from 30 to 40 acres on average across an 18-hole golf course. And a lot of golf course fairways are Bermuda grass. And so Bermuda grass is very susceptible to spring dead spot. So it's a really good case study. So you've got, on average, 30 to 40 acres of Bermuda grass. Theoretically, if you have spring dead spot on that Bermuda grass, if you're a turf grass manager, you're going to want to treat all 30 or 40 acres with the fungicide, with the proper fertility practices, with the cultivation practices, you name it, to give yourself the best chance to prevent spring dead spot. Now, the thing is the disease typically only occurs on 1 or 2 acres. Okay, so it's very specific, maybe up to 5 or 6 acres in severe cases. But it's less than 10% on average of the property of where you're going to have the disease. Yet we put 100% of our inputs into managing this disease. And so what we've been working a lot in the industry as researchers is trying to kind of bridge that gap from what we found in the research to actual practice that golf course superintendents and sports field managers, et cetera, are implementing, and saying, hey, look, if you know where this disease occurs each year, then maybe tailor more of your effort and money and inputs to those specific areas. And then the rest of the areas, maybe you can let off the gas, so to speak, and not do as many prescriptive management strategies. There's maybe save some labor, maybe save some, fungicide applications, things like that, and also save a lot of money. And so that's one thing that I've started to really be excited and really started to take in the last 2 or 3 years in the industry, where I'm seeing more and more turf grass professionals think that way, of managing areas, in a targeted way. And this isn't just for spring dead spot. This is for any management input, whether it be any disease or weed or nutrition, watering, et cetera. This site-specific prescriptive approach, I think, is starting to gain a lot of traction. So that's been pretty exciting. Now, regarding some other do's and don'ts of managing spring dead spot, I could do an entire 3-hour podcast on that alone. I did an entire dissertation on it. But it is, kind of the basics of it, so to speak, comes down to cultural and chemical practices. Okay, those are kind of the two categories we think of when managing really any pest in any kind of agricultural crop, whether it be turf or corn or whatever it may be. And so there's the cultural side, so that's the non-chemical side essentially, and then there's the chemical side, which includes mostly pesticides and other inputs like that. And so culturally, for spring dead spots, some of the primary things that we can do is we can plant resistant cultivars. Okay, so if we are starting fresh and we were planting a new turf grass, okay, you've got a new site, you're renovating your lawn, you're renovating a sports field, whatever it may be, we can select a cultivar of turf grass that is more resistant to the disease. Okay, that's the easiest and probably one of the most impactful things that we can do to prevent the disease. So breeding efforts have focused on that over the years of breeding resistant cultivars to spring dead spot. Unfortunately, we're way behind compared to many other diseases. Okay, so there's a disease called dollar spot that's very common on turf grasses, and the breeding efforts for dollar spot resistance are miles ahead of the breeding efforts for spring dead spot. So the goal would be to get to kind of the level that we're at with dollar spot resistance. Okay, but that is one thing we can do culturally to prevent spring dead spot. Another thing is we can just apply appropriate nutrition. I think that's one thing that gets missed occasionally where we see this disease is maybe we're not applying the appropriate amounts of fertilizer year over year. We've kind of been dabbling with the impact of nitrogen and other nutrients on the disease. And really what the results have shown is if you have a balanced nutrition, okay, so if you have your soil and tissue tests and they're coming back in that sufficient range, then you're good to go. If you have too much of one or too little of one, that's when you start to get in some pretty major trouble with this disease and with other issues as well. So just a balanced nutrition is kind of our approach and what we've seen that really helps prevent spring dead spot. And then cultivation strategies. Now, cultivation in turf grass is very different than cultivation in agricultural crops. Okay, so our approaches are a little less aggressive, so to speak. We're not turning over soil in the sense, usually our primary cultivation techniques is aeration, right? We're pulling cores or poking holes in the turf grass, allowing for gas exchange and more infiltration and things like that. And so that helps dilute that thatch layer and that organic matter, and that's very effective at reducing spring dead spots. Also things like top dressing sand. And so once again, top dressing kind of means a different thing in the turf world. It basically is applying low amounts of sand across the turf surface to dilute organic matter. And that once again goes into that idea of reducing the thatch and mitigating the disease. So culturally, that's kind of where we're at. Chemically, this has been a big challenge of figuring out fungicides that work effectively for spring dead spot. For years and years, we had a few options that were pretty good, but I wouldn't say they were exceptional. Okay, so we had something that we could at least apply and we would get maybe 30-40% control, which is better than nothing. But at this point, we've got some newer chemistries that have come out in the last 10 years or so that provide 95% or greater control of the disease, which is pretty exciting. The only problem with these newer chemistries is they're much more expensive. And so if you have to pay, and that goes back to that idea of precisely applying our treatments, right? If you're applying a really expensive product to 5 acres, that's probably worth it. It's really hard sell to apply that really expensive product to 40 acres though. Right, so if you can reduce the amount of acreage and product. So that's kind of where we're at with the key management strategies. Now I can dive deeper in if you'd like, but like I said, I've got 3 hours of material on that.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything else that you specifically would like to highlight, I don't think we have 3 hours, but if there's more you'd like to share, I would love to hear it.
Sure. Well, okay, I'll give one other kind of key thing that I've been starting to see more and more lately is how we apply it from the chemical management strategy, is how we apply our pesticides, and in this case, fungicides for the disease. The strategy in which we apply them is really, really important, right? If you go out and apply a fungicide and you say, I'm treating spring dead spot, okay, I'm going to apply this fungicide. Well, you can't just go out and spray a fungicide and hope for the best, right? There has to be some strategy behind what you're doing. And so one of the factors you have to consider is, okay, number one, which product am I applying? Okay, am I applying a fungicide that is effective? Okay, we do have good options for that, right? There's lots of resources online. There's extension publications. I'm not going to go into naming specific products, but there are lots of resources that you can find which fungicides generally work best for spring dead spot. Okay, so that's the first thing you can do is pick the right product. All right, the second part is you have to apply that product at the right time. You can't just go out and say, I'm going to spray this in July and hope for the best. Because if you spray a really good product for spring dead spot in July, well, guess what? It's not going to work at all. Okay, it doesn't do anything as far as disease control. If you apply it in the fall, however, you've got about a 2-month window in the fall when soil temperatures are just right that you apply a fungicide, and it's going to work much better on spring dead spot. Okay, so you have to pick the right product. You have to apply it at the right time. So there's that part of the strategy. And then the third thing you really have to consider is, where does that product go? Okay, does it stay on the leaf surface? Does it get into the roots? Does it move past the root zone? Where is the product in the environment? We've talked about this already, but the pathogen is going to be in the underground portions of the plant primarily. All right, so if you apply a fungicide onto the leaves and don't do anything about it, it's not going to work at all. All right, so it's going to stay on the leaves. It's not going to actually get down and contact the pathogen. And so we have to think about ways that we can actually do that as turfgrass managers, as how do we get the product to the pathogen. And in turfgrass systems, the best way to do that is, in most cases, they are irrigated systems. So we can apply a fungicide and pretty quickly turn on the irrigation system for 5 or 10 minutes and actually knock that fungicide into the root zone. Okay, so that's kind of our primary way of doing it. But there are also some other strategies like incorporating surfactants, or wetting agents, we call them. These are kind of almost like soapy-like materials that help basically break the surface tension of solution, and that can help move things down into the soil profile. So we found that that can actually be pretty effective for moving these products down into the root zone as well. And so you got to pick the right product, apply it at the right time, and think about where that product actually goes into the turfgrass system. And that goes for any disease, whether it be spring dead spot or any other foliar disease or root disease. You have to kind of think, well, where is this product actually ending up? I always use the example, if you have a cut on your arm and you've got Neosporin and you treat your ankle, is it going to do anything for that cut on your arm? No, it's not, right? It's actually got to contact the cut on your arm to actually see results. So it's the same idea with applying a medicine or a fungicide for a turfgrass disease.
Sure. Yeah. Our fans of the 4R principle from nutrient management will recognize some of those.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, those are all just a boatload of helpful information for anyone who is looking to combat this. Hopefully slightly less scary pest now that we know more about it. That's half the battle. I actually have 4 final questions this time. I'm going to throw in a bonus one that I have been thinking. Oh, wait, just kidding. 5 questions left because I forgot to ask about future research. So where are we going? What's next?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did. The future research, I heard a friend of mine is a great scientist. His name is Patrick Maxwell. I went to grad school with him, and he told me one time, he said, look, great research answers one question and leads to 10 more. Okay. And I've, that's almost discouraging in a weird way, because you can't really ever fully solve a problem. Okay, you can get a little closer to the answer, but as scientists, that's all we're doing is getting slightly closer ever more. So that's kind of one thing that's kind of neat about science in general is, you answer one question and generally it's going to lead to 8 or 10 more questions. So we've got lots of questions remaining for spring dead spot. One area of future research that I think needs to be really emphasized is, I mentioned it earlier, but our breeding efforts for germplasm that is resistant to spring dead spot. Okay, so for Bermuda grasses, zoysia grasses, things like that, can we have more resistant varieties or cultivars of turf grass for spring dead spot? And the answer is absolutely. It's just we need to continue our breeding efforts and improving our plant material. So there are some awesome turf grass breeders throughout the country and the world. So I'm pretty encouraged by that. Hopefully by the end of my career, we'll see something that's 98% resistant to spring dead spot. And I think we will. And so that's one area of research. The second area, I think, is kind of looking into more of this precision management idea. Can we get away with reducing our inputs and then maximizing or optimizing our control? And that's something that I've been doing in my lab here at the University of Arkansas. One of my graduate students, Mike Battaglia, did a lot of work during his master's degree where he basically determined how can we treat this disease with less inputs How can we schedule our fungicide applications precisely to where maybe instead of applying twice in the fall, we can only apply once, so we can cut our usage in half. And so he got some really interesting results with that. So we're looking at kind of modeling for applications, whether it be for fertilizer applications, fungicide applications, etc. Can we schedule these things very precisely to where they're going to maximize the effect and reduce the disease pressure there? Another area that I think is pretty interesting is this idea, like we talked about earlier, with the sequencing. Now that we have that information available to us, that opens a lot of doors and possibilities to do more molecular work to actually understand the biology more in depth of the pathogens that cause spring dead spot. It wouldn't surprise me if we start to unpack some of the reasons why we see the disease expressed the way it does. There's already some preliminary information I can't quite let go of yet, but it's exciting to see kind of understand how the pathogen and the plant interact together. That's one thing we don't fully understand. We've got ideas, but we don't understand why does it occur the way it does? Why do we see it expressed the way it does? So just understanding the biology behind the pathogen more, I think, is really the kind of the next frontier. And then lastly, how can we manage this disease, more cost effectively? This is a large acre disease, and so that's kind of a challenge. If you're a sod grower and you're managing hundreds of acres of sod, all of a sudden you're dealing with this issue year over year, and you want clean plant material to send out to your customers. And so you're having to put in lots and lots of inputs to manage this disease. Well, how can we do that more cost effectively to help them generate greater profits and also help our turfgrass managers reduce inputs? So those are kind of the four key things I'd like to see in the future with this particular disease.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully in 10 to 15 years, we can have another episode on all of those and all the progress we've made there.
That would be great. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so now I have 4 left, one of which is a fun little bonus.
All right.
What if Spring Dead Spot was going to a Halloween party, what costume would it have?
That's good. Let's see here. You caught me off guard. That's a good one, Abby. Well, I don't know. Like, I would say the Grim Reaper, I think, is pretty good. It's gonna be kind of dead is in the name, so I think that's appropriate. And also, it's hard to avoid. And whether you're a turfgrass manager in Virginia or a turfgrass manager in Arkansas, this disease comes for everyone. So I'd say the Grim Reaper.
That's a good one. Yeah, by the time you see it, it's too late.
Exactly right. It's over.
For sure. I think I would say maybe like going as like the common cold of like yeah. Mostly just helps you not flourish. Like combined with other things is going to give you a really bad time.
I like it.
Very annoying kind of.
Yeah, just kind of pesky.
We know a lot about it, but can't fully get rid of it. Can't kick it all away.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Great. You handled that bonus question with aplomb, so great job.
Thanks, Abby.
So then my normal final 3 questions. First off, if people want to learn more about any of the things we've talked about today, where can they go to learn more?
Sure. Well, first of all, you can check out the review paper. It is open access. It's hopefully written. It's got some technical language in there, but there's also kind of something for everyone, so to speak. We've got tables in there that list recommendations for different products and efficacies, and it's got distribution maps. So there is some information in there that you can actually check out in the paper without getting into the weeds to hopefully get some more information about the disease and how to manage it. I've gotten a couple extension articles online and trade magazine articles online that people can check out that are open to the public. One of ours, we have a fact sheet at the University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture that we published on Spring Dead Spot that's got some great information. It's really 1 or 2 pages long, gives kind of the highlights of how to manage this disease, some of the background information. I'll give a plug to NCSU Turf Files. So that's NC State's turfgrass website. They do a really great job of putting out some nice extension materials with recommendations for specific turfgrass diseases, and they have a nice page on spring dead spot. So I got to give a shout out. Since I went there to school for my undergrad and master's, I always try to give them a plug when I can, but they've got some really good information. Another one that I'll highlight is Dr. Rick Latton's book, A Practical Guide to Turfgrass Fungicides. That's a really great book for just disease management in general, and there's some good information in there on spring dead spot and other turfgrass diseases. So those are kind of the key things. And you can also, follow social media. I'm on X pretty commonly, post about this disease in the spring and fall. So give updates and highlights of when the disease is active and how severe it is from year to year. I always try to post about that at appropriate times of the year. There's some other great researchers that I would recommend looking into as well that have done a lot of work on this disease. I mentioned one earlier, Nathan Walker at Oklahoma State. He's done a lot of great work in this particular disease. Dr. Lee Miller at Purdue University. He's also, I know, a friend of the Tri-Societies and was an editor for a long time on one of the journals. He's done a lot of great foundational work on spring dead spot, and also the folks at North Carolina State, Jim Kearns and Lee Butler. They've done a lot of excellent work on spring dead spot over the years. And then lastly, my PhD advisor, Dr. David McCall at Virginia Tech. I think he's definitely been a leader in the last 5 or 6 years in the research efforts for spring dead spot, and his team over there at Virginia Tech are doing a lot of awesome work on this idea of precise or precision management of the disease. So if you want to look up any of those faculty members, they've got some great information. They all have extension appointments, so they've got some cool fact sheets and online resources that would be worth checking out.
Yeah, those are some great resources. So definitely check those out, people. We'll have links to as many of those as we can get in the show notes. So then next question is, if people want to kind of take the next step and get involved, this could be either as someone who wants to research these or, probably not like the average, person is going to dive in on managing a golf course. But for people that do have access to that, what are kind of the next steps to combat this or get involved?
Well, I'd say for the general public, right, if you're not a turfgrass manager, if you're just somebody who likes to recreate in an area like a park or a golf course or a sports field or whatever it may be, I think just the awareness that turfgrasses get sick too. Okay, so they have diseases, and so they're very challenging to manage. And I think it's easy to get a little frustrated at all the conditions of this area. This field doesn't look very nice, and there's disease all over. There's these dead areas. Just understanding that it's not so easy to manage these, and maybe giving a little grace to the turfgrass manager. That's one thing that I think can be very helpful, is just understanding that it's a bit of a challenge. We've spent years and years managing this one particular disease, and this is just one of many. Okay, so having that kind of idea that, okay, plants get sick too, turfgrasses struggle, it's going to happen at different times of the year. That's one thing. For actual people who are trying to grow grass, whether you're just doing it for fun or, at your lawn around your house, or whether you're an actual golf course superintendent or whatever it may be, there are lots of resources, lots of next steps. My suggestion would be to kind of think about this idea of managing the disease culturally first. And so how can we apply fertilizer appropriately? How can we aerate appropriately? And then for those who are really kind of advanced turfgrass managers, maybe the sports turf managers or golf course superintendents or sod growers or whatever it may be, lawn care operators as well, how can we manage these responsibly using chemical inputs like fungicides? And so that's kind of something that I would look at, is just thinking about how can we reduce what we're putting into the environment to manage this disease, and how can we optimize our disease management. And then for researchers, we've got lots of opportunities, extension agents, things like that. I know there's a lot of extension folks who listen to this. Just being aware of some of the basic recommendations for this disease. You don't have to get into the weeds on it and understand all the idiosyncrasies of this particular disease, but just some of the basic highlights of, okay, this is a disease, which plants does it cause issues on, and then what are kind of one or two things we can do to prevent it. That will go a long way in managing this particular disease.
Great advice. Wonderful. Last question. What is one fun fact about you that listeners would not know if all they had was your research?
That's a good one. I would say, well, I'll give two that are kind of interesting, so to speak. This is one I've always given since I was a kid. But Andy Griffith is my cousin. Okay, so the Andy Griffith Show. Mayberry is based off this town called Mount Airy, North Carolina. It's a little tiny town in the northern part of the mountains of North Carolina. Beautiful area. So my grandfather and grandmother grew up in that area. And then I grew up just across the border into Virginia, so right in that spot. And Andy Griffith is my fifth cousin. Okay, so that's always kind of a neat little fun fact. I never met him. My grandfather knew him very well. But we always watched the show growing up, and it's just fun to kind of be like, oh, that's family. So that one's cool. Another one is, my dad and brother are both songwriters in country music and bluegrass music, and so they've had some really cool success with that and getting songs heard on the radio that they've written, and so that's always kind of fun. They're not necessarily the ones singing them on the radio, but they're the ones who penned the lyrics. So that's kind of fun to hear them on the radio indirectly at times.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Those are two fantastic fun facts. We'll see if I can get away with not having the Andy Griffith song stuck in my head all day.
Yeah, that's right. Good luck.
Maybe not. It might not happen. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge on this and for all the work that you're continuing to do to advance the research. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me, Abby.
Thank you for listening to Field Lab Earth. More information can be found in the description below. Thank you.